You have 30 seconds to tell me why I shouldn't burn this will and pretend your father-in-law never existed. The lawyer's words hung in the air like poison, and I felt my world tilt sideways. $20. After everything my husband David and I had sacrificed for his family, after all the years of caring for his ailing father, after losing David in that car accident 6 months ago while he was rushing to get his father's medication, $20 was what I was worth to them. You know, people always talk about karma and justice, about how good things come to those who wait, and how the universe has a way of balancing things out. I used to believe that too, back when I was naive enough to think that love and loyalty meant something. But sitting in that mahogany-paneled office, surrounded by my late husband's relatives who looked at me like I was something they'd scrape off their shoes, I wondered if maybe the universe had forgotten about people like me. How are you doing today, by the way? I hope wherever you're watching this from, you're somewhere warm and safe, maybe with a cup of coffee or tea in your hands. The weather here has been unpredictable lately, much like life itself, I suppose. But let me tell you something, this story you're about to hear will remind you that sometimes the most devastating moments in our lives are actually doorways to something extraordinary. My name is Elena Martinez, and this is the story of how I went from being a broken widow clutching $20 and 4 hungry children to discovering that sometimes the people who try to destroy you are actually paving the way for your greatest triumph. I can still see myself in that lawyer's office, holding that pathetic check while my 4-year-old quadruplets waited in the car, probably wondering why Mommy was taking so long and when we'd finally have dinner. But before I tell you about the farmhouse, before I tell you about what was hidden in that sealed letter, before I tell you how I made every single one of those greedy relatives regret the day they decided to cross me, I need you to understand something. If this story resonates with you, if it gives you hope or makes you believe in second chances, please hit that like button and subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to hear that their darkest moment might just be the beginning of their greatest comeback. But let me start from the beginning, because the woman sitting in that lawyer's office that day was nothing like the woman I am now. I was 28 when David died, and we'd been married for 6 years. We met in college. He was studying business. I was getting my degree in agricultural science, which everyone thought was weird for a girl from the suburbs. But I'd always been drawn to the idea of growing things, nurturing life from the ground up. David used to joke that I could make anything bloom, even in the worst soil. We were so young when we got married, so full of dreams and plans. David wanted to expand his father's real estate business, maybe branch out into sustainable development. I wanted to start an organic farm, maybe teach people about sustainable agriculture. We had it all mapped out. We'd work together, build something beautiful, raise a family in the countryside somewhere. Then the quadruplets happened. 4 babies at once. Emma, Sophie, Lucas, and Michael. The doctors said it was a miracle, and it was, but it was also terrifying. Suddenly we had 4 tiny humans depending on us, for college funds to think about, 4 times the diapers, 4 times the sleepless nights. Our dreams of the countryside farm got put on hold. David threw himself into working for his father's company, and I became a full-time mom. David's father, Robert Castellano, was one of those old-school wealthy men who believed in family loyalty above everything else. He'd built his real estate empire from nothing, starting with a single rental property and growing it into a multi-million-dollar business spanning 3 states. He was tough, demanding, but he loved David fiercely, and when the quadruplets were born, he absolutely doted on them. These children are the future of the Castellano legacy, he used to say, bouncing one of the babies on his knee while the others crawled around his massive living room. They'll inherit everything I've built. I believed him. We all did. When Robert was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 2 years ago, David and I moved into the family mansion to help care for him. It made sense. The house was huge, there was plenty of room for the kids, and Robert needed constant care. David's siblings, Patricia and Marcus, lived across the country and visited maybe twice a year. David's cousin Vincent ran one of the satellite offices, but was always too busy to spend real time with Robert. So it was just us. David working 16-hour days to keep the business running while his father underwent treatment, me managing the household, caring for Robert, and raising 4 toddlers. We gave up our little apartment, our independence, our privacy. We gave up everything because family comes first, right? Robert seemed to get better for a while. The treatments were working, his energy was returning, and he started talking about the future again. He'd pull me aside sometimes and tell me how grateful he was, how David had chosen well, how the children were his greatest joy. "You're the daughter I never had, Elena," he told me one evening as I helped him with his medication. "David's siblings, they're good people, but they don't understand what family really means. You do. You and David, you've sacrificed everything for this family." I should have known then that something was different about the way he looked at me when he said those words. There was something in his eyes, like he was trying to tell me something important, something he couldn't say out loud yet. Then came that terrible night 6 months ago. Robert had been having chest pains, and his regular medication wasn't helping. It was past midnight, the roads were icy, but David didn't hesitate. He grabbed the car keys and headed out to the 24-hour pharmacy across town to get the emergency medication Robert's doctor had prescribed. The police said he never saw the drunk driver who ran the red light. David died instantly. The funeral was a blur of black clothes and whispered condolences. Patricia and Marcus flew in, suddenly very concerned about family business. Vincent started asking questions about the company's finances. Everyone was very kind to me, very supportive, but I could feel something shifting underneath all the sympathy. Robert was devastated. He aged 10 years in the week after David's funeral. He stopped eating, stopped talking about the future, stopped playing with the children. It was like losing David had broken something fundamental inside him. "I should have gone myself," he kept saying. "David died because of me." I tried to comfort him, tried to tell him it wasn't his fault, but grief had settled into his bones like winter. 3 months later, his cancer came back with a vengeance. This time, the treatments didn't work. Robert died on a Tuesday morning in early spring, with me holding his hand and the quadruplets playing quietly in the corner of his bedroom. His last words were to me, "Take care of them, Elena. Take care of our children." I thought he meant the quadruplets. I had no idea he meant something much bigger than that. The will reading was scheduled for the following Friday. Patricia and Marcus had flown in again, this time with their spouses and their own children. Vincent brought his wife and his lawyer. The mansion felt crowded with relatives who'd barely visited when Robert was alive, but were suddenly very interested in his final wishes. I dressed the quadruplets in their best clothes and tried to prepare them for what I thought would be a formal but straightforward process. Robert had always talked about leaving everything to David, and with David gone, I assumed it would pass to the children, with me as their guardian managing everything until they came of age. I was so naive. The family lawyer, Mr. Harrison, was a thin, nervous man who'd worked with Robert for over 20 years. He kept glancing at me with this strange expression I couldn't read, part pity, part something else I couldn't identify. "Before we begin," Patricia announced, standing up in the middle of Robert's study like she owned the place, "I think we should address the elephant in the room." Everyone turned to look at her. She was a sharp-featured woman in her 50s, always impeccably dressed, always ready with an opinion about how other people should live their lives. "Elena," she continued, her voice dripping with false sympathy, "we know this has been difficult for you. Losing David, then father, raising 4 children alone. We want you to know that the family will take care of you." Something cold settled in my stomach. "What do you mean?" Marcus cleared his throat. He was younger than Patricia, but had the same calculating eyes. "What Patricia means is that we understand you might have had certain expectations about Father's will. But we want to make sure you understand that the Castellano business empire requires experienced management. The children will inherit their grandfather's legacy, of course, Vincent added smoothly. But they're far too young to understand these responsibilities. The family has discussed it, and we think it's best if the business assets are managed by those of us with actual experience in real estate and finance. I felt like I was listening to them from underwater. I don't understand, Robert always said. Father said a lot of things when he was grieving, Patricia interrupted. But the reality is that you have no business experience, no understanding of how to manage a multi-million-dollar company. The kindest thing we can do is ensure the children's inheritance is protected until they're old enough to claim it. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat uncomfortably. Perhaps we should just read the will. Yes, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Let's hear what Robert actually wanted. What happened next will haunt me for the rest of my life. Mr. Harrison opened the official document with shaking hands and began to read. I, Robert James Castellano, being of sound mind and body, do hereby distribute my assets as follows. The business empire, worth over $50 million, was divided between Patricia, Marcus, and Vincent. The mansion went to Patricia. The vacation homes went to Marcus. The investment portfolios went to Vincent. The cars, the art collection, the jewelry, all distributed among the relatives who'd barely visited Robert in his final years. And then came the part about me and the children. To my son David's widow, Elena Martinez, and to my grandchildren Emma, Sophie, Lucas, and Michael Castellano, I leave the sum of $20 each, to be distributed immediately. The room went completely silent. $20 each. $100 total for me and the 4 children who had been Robert's greatest joy, his legacy, his future. I stared at Mr. Harrison, waiting for him to continue, waiting for the part where he explained that this was some kind of mistake or legal formality before getting to the real inheritance. But he just folded the document and set it down on Robert's desk. That concludes the reading of Robert James Castellano's last will and testament, he said quietly. Patricia was the first to speak. Well, that's settled then. Elena, we know this might seem harsh, but Father was very clear about his wishes. $20 is actually quite generous, considering you're not a blood relative. But the children, I started. The children will be fine, Marcus said. We're family. We'll make sure they're taken care of. But you have to understand, Elena, that caring for 4 children is expensive. Maybe it's time to consider what's best for them. Vincent leaned forward with a smile that made my skin crawl. We've actually been discussing this as a family. Patricia and her husband have a beautiful home with excellent schools. Marcus has that wonderful property in Connecticut. We could each take one of the children, give them the kind of life they deserve. The world tilted sideways. They wanted to split up my children, take them away from me and divide them among themselves like assets in a business deal. No, I said, standing up so fast my chair fell backward. Absolutely not. Those are my children. Legally, yes, Patricia said coolly. But practically speaking, Elena, how are you going to support 4 children on $20? You have no job, no savings, no family of your own to help you. You've been living in Father's house, depending on his generosity. That's over now. You'll need to be out of the mansion by Sunday, Marcus added. We're putting it on the market immediately. I looked around the room at these people I'd considered family for 6 years. People I'd cooked for, cleaned for, cared for when they visited. People whose children I'd babysat, whose problems I'd listened to, whose father I'd nursed through his final illness. They were looking at me like I was a stranger. Like I was nothing. Robert loved those children, I said desperately. He would never have wanted them separated. Father was sentimental in his old age, Patricia replied. Grief and illness clouded his judgment. But the will is clear, and it's legal. $20 each. That's what he decided you were worth. Mr. Harrison was packing up his papers, avoiding eye contact with everyone. The other relatives were already discussing logistics, who would take which child, how to handle the transition, whether the children were old enough to understand what was happening. I grabbed the $20 checks from the desk and walked out of that room with whatever dignity I had left. The quadruplets were waiting in the car, playing with their tablets, completely unaware that their entire world had just been destroyed. Emma looked up when I got in the driver's seat. "Mommy, why are you crying?" I wiped my eyes and tried to smile. "I'm not crying, sweetheart. Mommy's just tired." "Are we going home now?" Sophie asked. "Home. We didn't have a home anymore." That night, I packed everything we could fit into our old Honda Civic. Clothes, toys, a few photos, the children's favorite blankets. Everything else, all the furniture David and I had accumulated over the years, all the baby equipment, all the memories, had to stay behind. I found a cheap motel on the outskirts of town that allowed children. $20 a night, which meant our $100 inheritance would last exactly 3.5 days. The room had 2 double beds, a tiny bathroom, and a broken air conditioner. The carpet was stained, the walls were thin, and I could hear trucks rumbling past on the highway all night long. But it was shelter, and it was ours, at least for now. I lay awake that first night listening to my children breathe, trying to figure out what to do next. I had no job, no references, no family to turn to. My parents had died in a car accident when I was in college, and I had no siblings. David's family had made it clear I was no longer welcome. The children would start asking questions soon. They'd want to know why we weren't going back to Grandpa Robert's house, why we were sleeping in this strange place, why Mommy seemed so scared all the time. How do you explain to 4-year-olds that the people they trusted have decided they're worth more separated than together? By morning, I had made a decision. I would find a job, any job, and I would keep my family together no matter what it took. I would prove to those greedy relatives that they had underestimated me, that $20 was just the beginning of my story, not the end. I had no idea that in less than 24 hours, everything I thought I knew about Robert's will, about his final wishes, about my place in the Castellano family, was about to change forever. The knock on our motel room door came at exactly 9 o'clock the next morning. I almost didn't answer the door. The quadruplets were still sleeping, exhausted from the emotional chaos of the past few days, and I was sitting on the edge of the bed trying to figure out how to make our remaining $68 stretch until I could find work. The last thing I expected was visitors. But the knocking was persistent, polite but insistent, and I was afraid it might wake the children. I peered through the peephole and saw Mr. Harrison standing in the motel hallway, looking nervous and checking his watch. What was Robert's lawyer doing here? I opened the door just a crack, keeping the chain lock engaged. "Mr. Harrison? What are you doing here?" He glanced around the empty hallway and lowered his voice. "Mrs. Castellano, I need to speak with you. It's about your father-in-law's estate. There are some things that weren't discussed yesterday." My heart started pounding. "What kind of things?" "Things I couldn't say in front of the family." "May I come in?" I looked back at my sleeping children, then at this man who had delivered the most devastating news of my life just 24 hours earlier. Every instinct told me to slam the door and pretend this conversation never happened. But desperation makes you do things you wouldn't normally consider. I unlatched the chain and let him in. Mr. Harrison stepped into our tiny motel room, and his face immediately softened with what looked like genuine sympathy. He took in the cramped space, the suitcases stacked in the corner, the children's clothes hanging over the bathroom door to dry. "Mrs. Castellano," he said quietly, "I owe you an explanation." "About what?" The will was pretty clear. $20 each. End of story. He shook his head and pulled a manila envelope from his briefcase. "That wasn't the real will." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What do you mean that wasn't the real will?" "Your father-in-law created 2 documents. The one I read yesterday was designed to protect you and the children from his other relatives. The real will, his actual final wishes, are in here." He held up the envelope. But I couldn't reveal it in front of Patricia and the others. Robert was very specific about that. I sank down onto the bed, my legs suddenly unable to support me. I don't understand. Mr. Harrison sat down in the room's single chair and leaned forward. Elena, your father-in-law knew his family better than you realized. He knew that if they discovered what he really intended to leave you, they would contest the will, tie everything up in court for years, maybe even try to prove you had manipulated him in his final illness. But I never. I know you didn't. Robert knew you didn't. But Patricia and Marcus and Vincent, they would have fought tooth and nail to prevent you from inheriting what Robert actually wanted you to have. So he created a decoy will that gave them what they expected to receive, and he made separate arrangements for you. My hands were shaking. What kind of arrangements? 3 months before he died, Robert purchased a property in your name. A farm about 2 hours north of here, in Millbrook County. 150 acres of prime agricultural land, completely paid for, with a fully renovated farmhouse and state-of-the-art equipment. I stared at him. That's impossible. I would have known. I would have had to sign papers. You did sign papers. Remember when Robert asked you to witness some documents for him? When he said it was just routine business paperwork. The memory came flooding back. It was about a month before Robert died, when he was having one of his better days. He'd called me into his study and asked me to sign several documents as a witness. I'd been so focused on getting the children ready for their nap that I'd barely glanced at what I was signing. Those weren't witness signatures, Mr. Harrison continued. Those were ownership transfer documents. Robert had already purchased the property through a shell company, and he was transferring it directly to you. But why? Why would he do that without telling me? Mr. Harrison's expression grew sad. Because he knew he was dying, and he knew his family would never accept you as David's true heir. He also knew something else about you, something he discovered when he was researching the property. What do you mean? Elena, do you remember telling Robert about your college degree? About your thesis on sustainable agriculture? I nodded. It had come up once during dinner, maybe a year ago. Robert had seemed interested, asking questions about organic farming techniques and soil management. I'd been surprised by his curiosity. He kept that thesis. He had it reviewed by agricultural experts. He spent months researching sustainable farming operations, studying profit margins, learning about the growing market for organic produce. He became convinced that you could turn that farm into something extraordinary. The room felt like it was spinning. Mr. Harrison, I don't understand what you're telling me. He opened the manila envelope and pulled out a thick stack of documents. Your father-in-law didn't just buy you a farm, Elena. He bought you a future. The property comes with a fully equipped dairy operation, organic certification for the entire acreage, contracts with 3 major grocery chains for organic produce, and a business plan that projects 7-figure annual profits within 5 years. I couldn't breathe. That's not possible. There's more. He handed me a sealed letter with my name written in Robert's familiar handwriting. He wanted you to read this when you were ready to understand what he was really giving you. With trembling fingers, I opened the letter. My dear Elena, if you're reading this, then Harrison has finally been able to tell you the truth about my real intentions. I hope you can forgive an old man for the deception, but I knew my family would never allow you to inherit what you truly deserve. You gave up everything for David and for me. Your dreams, your career, your independence. You sacrificed 6 years of your life caring for our family, and when David died, you continued caring for me without complaint, without asking for anything in return. But I remember the light in your eyes when you talked about farming, about growing things, about teaching people to work with the land instead of against it. I remember how you made my garden bloom that first summer you lived with us, how you turned a patch of weeds into something beautiful. The farm I've given you isn't charity, Elena. It's an investment in the future I know you can create. The business plan is solid, the equipment is top of the line, and the contracts are already in place. All you need to do is what you've always done, nurture something from the ground up. My grandchildren deserve to grow up knowing their mother is strong, capable, and independent. They deserve to see you build something extraordinary with your own hands. And my family deserves to learn that they underestimated the most valuable person in the Castellano legacy. The farm is yours, free and clear. The startup capital is in a separate account that Harrison will explain. Take your children to the countryside, Elena. Show them what their mother can do when she's finally free to bloom. With all my love and respect, Robert. P.S. There's one more surprise waiting for you at the farm. David knew about this plan. We discussed it the week before he died. He was so proud of you, so excited about your future. He left something there for you to find. I was crying so hard I could barely see the words. Mr. Harrison handed me a tissue and waited patiently while I tried to process what I'd just learned. Elena, he said gently, I have a car outside. If you're ready, I can take you to see the property today. I looked at my sleeping children, then at the motel room that represented everything I thought my life had become. 24 hours ago, I'd been a widow with 4 children and $100 to my name. Now I was being told that I owned a working farm worth millions of dollars. This is real, I whispered. It's real. The deed is in your name, the bank accounts are active, and the farm manager Robert hired has been maintaining everything, waiting for you to arrive. Emma stirred on the bed and opened her eyes. Mommy? Who's the man? I wiped my tears and tried to smile. This is Mr. Harrison, sweetheart. He has something very exciting to show us. What kind of exciting? I looked at Mr. Harrison, then back at my daughter. How would you like to see a real farm? With animals and tractors and everything. Emma sat up, suddenly wide awake. Really? Can we pet the animals? I think we can do better than that, I said, my voice growing stronger. I think we might get to live there. The other 3 children were waking up now, drawn by the excitement in Emma's voice. Within minutes, they were all asking questions about farms and animals and whether they could ride horses. As I packed our few belongings back into the suitcases, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Real, genuine hope that maybe our story wasn't ending with $20 and a broken family. Maybe it was just beginning. But as Mr. Harrison loaded our suitcases into his car and I buckled the children into their car seats, I had no idea that the farm was just the first surprise Robert had left for me. I had no idea that David's final gift was waiting in a place I'd never thought to look. And I definitely had no idea that Patricia, Marcus, and Vincent were about to discover that the woman they dismissed with $20 was now the owner of the most valuable agricultural property in 3 counties. The drive to Millbrook County took us through rolling hills and past fields that were just beginning to turn green with spring growth. The children pressed their faces to the windows, pointing at cows and horses and asking endless questions about farm life. Will we have our own animals, Mommy? Lucas wanted to know. I don't know yet, sweetheart. We'll have to see what's there. But even as I said it, I was remembering Robert's letter, his mention of a dairy operation and organic certification. If he'd really set up everything he claimed, then yes, we would have our own animals. We would have our own everything. Mr. Harrison turned off the main highway onto a winding country road lined with old oak trees. It's just up ahead, he said. Robert wanted you to see it for the first time the way David would have seen it. What do you mean? You'll understand when we get there. We crested a small hill, and suddenly the farm spread out before us like something from a dream. The farmhouse was a beautiful 2-story colonial with a wraparound porch and flower boxes under every window. Behind it stretched fields of rich, dark soil, dotted with red barns and outbuildings. I could see cattle grazing in distant pastures, and what looked like a large vegetable garden already planted for the season. Oh my God, I breathed. Welcome home, Elena, Mr. Harrison said softly. The children were practically bouncing in their seats. Is that really ours, Mommy? Is that really where we're going to live? I couldn't speak. I just nodded and tried not to cry again. We pulled into the circular driveway in front of the farmhouse, and I saw a man in work clothes walking toward us from one of the barns. He was probably in his 50s, with graying hair and the kind of deep tan that comes from years of outdoor work. "That's Tom Bradley," Mr. Harrison explained. "He's been managing the property since Robert purchased it. He knows you're coming." Tom approached the car with a warm smile and opened my door. "Mrs. Castellano? I'm Tom Bradley. Mr. Robert told me all about you and the children. Welcome to Millbrook Farm." I shook his hand, still feeling like I was in some kind of dream. "Thank you. This is all so overwhelming." "I imagine it is. But don't worry, we'll take it slow. Why don't I show you around the house first, let the children get settled, and then we can talk about the operation." The farmhouse was even more beautiful inside than out. The rooms were spacious and bright, with hardwood floors and windows that looked out over the fields. The kitchen was enormous, with modern appliances and a breakfast nook that would be perfect for family meals. Upstairs, there were 5 bedrooms, including a master suite that took my breath away. "Mr. Robert had this room designed specifically for you," Tom explained. "He said you'd need a quiet space to plan and think." The children were running from room to room, claiming bedrooms and exclaiming over the size of everything. For the first time in months, they sounded like normal, happy children instead of confused, grieving babies. "Tom," I said as we walked back downstairs, "can you tell me about the business side of this?" Mr. Harrison mentioned contracts and profit projections, but I don't understand how any of this is possible. Tom's face lit up. "Mrs. Castellano, your father-in-law was a brilliant businessman, but he was also a man who understood potential when he saw it. He spent months researching your background, your education, your ideas about sustainable agriculture. Then he spent more months finding the perfect property and setting up the infrastructure to support your vision." "My vision?" "The organic certification, the dairy operation, the vegetable production, the contracts with grocery chains, all of it is based on the business plan you wrote for your senior thesis. Mr. Robert had it analyzed by experts, and they all agreed it was revolutionary." I stared at him. "You've read my thesis?" "I've studied it. We all have. The farm manager he hired before me, the agricultural consultants, the veterinarian who oversees the dairy operation, we've all been preparing for the day you'd arrive and take over." "Take over?" "Tom, I don't know anything about running a farm business. I wrote that thesis 8 years ago, and I've been a stay-at-home mom ever since." Tom smiled. "Mrs. Castellano, with respect, you've been doing a lot more than staying home. You've been managing a household, caring for an elderly man with complex medical needs, raising 4 children, and somehow still finding time to maintain the most beautiful garden anyone in this county has ever seen." "How do you know about the garden?" "Mr. Robert sent me pictures. He was so proud of what you'd accomplished with that little patch of land behind his house. He said if you could make roses bloom in clay soil with no irrigation system, imagine what you could do with 150 acres of prime farmland and unlimited resources." We walked outside, and Tom began showing me around the property. The dairy barn housed 50 head of certified organic cattle. The chicken coops were home to over 200 free-range hens. The vegetable fields were already planted with early spring crops, and Tom explained that the harvest would begin in just 6 weeks. "The grocery contracts are for organic produce and dairy products," he said. "We're already supplying 2 regional chains, and there's a waiting list of restaurants that want to work with us. The profit margins are extraordinary because there's such high demand for truly organic, locally sourced food." "And Robert set all of this up without me knowing?" "He wanted it to be perfect before you arrived. He wanted you to be able to step into a fully functioning operation instead of having to build everything from scratch while you were grieving and adjusting to single motherhood." As we walked back toward the house, I saw the children playing in the yard, chasing chickens and laughing in a way I hadn't heard since before David died. Emma was trying to pet a calf through the fence, while Sophie was collecting eggs under Tom's wife's supervision. "There's one more thing," Tom said as we reached the porch. "Mr. Robert left specific instructions about something your husband wanted you to have. It's in the barn office." My heart started pounding again. "What kind of something?" "I think it's better if you see for yourself." We walked to the main barn, and Tom led me to a small office space that had been set up with a desk, filing cabinets, and a computer. On the desk was a wooden box with my name carved into the lid. "David made this for you," Tom said quietly. "Mr. Robert said he was working on it the week before he died. He wanted you to have it when you were ready to start your new life." With shaking hands, I opened the box. Inside was a leather-bound journal with Elena's farm dreams embossed on the cover. The first page was covered in David's familiar handwriting. "My beautiful Elena, if you're reading this, then Dad's plan worked and you're finally where you belong. I know this must all seem impossible, but I want you to understand something. This farm isn't Dad's gift to you. It's my gift to you. I was the one who suggested he read your thesis. I was the one who convinced him that you could turn sustainable agriculture into a profitable business. I was the one who found this property and fell in love with it, imagining you and the children here. I know you gave up your dreams to take care of our family. I know you put your career on hold to be the mother and daughter-in-law we needed. But I never forgot the woman I fell in love with in college, the one who could make anything grow, who believed she could change the world one farm at a time. This is your chance, Elena. This is your opportunity to show our children what their mother is really capable of. Build something extraordinary here. Create the life we always talked about. I love you forever. David. P.S. Check the bottom of the box. There's something else I want you to have." I lifted the journal and found a small velvet pouch underneath. Inside was a key attached to a note for the greenhouse. Our secret project. D. "Tom, is there a greenhouse on the property?" His face broke into a grin. "There is now. Your husband designed it himself. Mr. Robert had it built exactly to David's specifications. It's behind the main house, hidden by those oak trees." We walked around the house, and there it was, a beautiful glass greenhouse, maybe 30 feet long and 20 feet wide, filled with seedlings and young plants I didn't recognize. David researched heirloom varieties, Tom explained as I unlocked the door with trembling fingers. "Vegetables and herbs that have been almost lost to commercial farming. He thought you could develop a specialty market for rare organic produce." I walked through the greenhouse in a daze. Every plant was labeled with David's handwriting. Cherokee purple tomatoes, glass gem corn, dragon tongue beans. Varieties I'd only read about in agricultural journals. "He spent months planning this," Tom continued. "He said you'd always talked about preserving genetic diversity in food crops. This was going to be your research laboratory." I sank down onto a wooden bench David had placed near the back wall. 6 months ago, my husband had been planning our future on this farm. He'd been designing greenhouses and researching heirloom seeds and convincing his father to invest in my dreams. And I'd had no idea. "Mrs. Castellano?" Tom's voice was gentle. "Are you all right?" I can't believe this is real. Yesterday, I thought I was going to lose my children. Today, I'm standing in a greenhouse my dead husband designed for me on a farm I didn't know I owned. It's a lot to process. But Elena, if I may say so, Mr. Robert and David knew exactly what they were doing. This farm is going to change your life, and it's going to change your children's lives. But more than that, it's going to prove to everyone who underestimated you that they made a terrible mistake." As if summoned by his words, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Patricia's number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Elena." Patricia's voice was sharp with barely controlled anger. "We need to talk." "About what?" "About the property records we just discovered. About the farm that somehow got transferred to your name 3 months ago. About the fact that you've been lying to this family about your financial situation." My blood went cold. "I haven't been lying about anything." "Really?" Because according to the county records, you own a 150-acre farm worth over $3 million. That doesn't sound like someone who needs $20 to survive. Patricia, I just found out about this today. I had no idea. Don't lie to me, Elena. Nobody transfers property worth that much without the recipient knowing about it. You manipulated a sick old man into giving you what should have belonged to his real family. That's not what happened, isn't it? You moved into his house, isolated him from his children, convinced him that you were the only one who cared about him. And now, conveniently, you're the owner of the most valuable piece of real estate in 3 counties. Tom was watching my face, and he must have seen something there because he stepped closer. Is everything all right? I shook my head and walked outside so the children wouldn't hear. Patricia, Robert made his own decisions. If you have a problem with his will, we're going to contest it. Marcus is already talking to lawyers. We're going to prove that you coerced a dying man into changing his estate plans. We're going to show that you isolated him from his real family and manipulated him when he was vulnerable. You can't do that. The property transfer was legal. Was it? Because our lawyer thinks there might be grounds to challenge any major financial decisions Robert made in his final months. Especially decisions that benefit someone who had complete control over his daily care and medication. The implication hit me like a slap. Are you suggesting that I drugged him or something? I'm suggesting that a jury might find it very suspicious that a woman with no money and no family suddenly inherits millions of dollars from an elderly man she was caring for. Especially when that man's real children were kept away from him during his final illness. You weren't kept away. You chose not to visit. We're going to fight this, Elena. We're going to take that farm away from you, and we're going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person you really are. A gold digger who preyed on a grieving widower. The line went dead. I stood there staring at my phone, feeling like the ground was shifting beneath my feet again. Just when I thought I'd found solid ground, just when I thought my children and I were finally safe, the Castellanos were preparing to destroy everything. Elena, Tom's voice was concerned. What's wrong? They're going to contest the will. They're going to try to take the farm away. Tom's expression hardened. They can try. But they're going to have a very difficult time proving that Mr. Robert wasn't of sound mind when he made these arrangements. He was very careful about documentation, very thorough about establishing his mental competency. What do you mean? He had himself evaluated by 3 different doctors in the months before he died. Cognitive tests, psychological assessments, the works. He wanted to make absolutely sure that no one could claim he wasn't capable of making his own decisions. He knew they would try to contest it. He knew his family, Elena. He knew they would never accept that he chose you over them. So he prepared for war. I looked back at the farmhouse, where my children were playing in the yard, finally happy and secure for the first time in months. I thought about David's greenhouse, about Robert's letter, about the life they'd both planned for us. Tom, what happens if they win? What happens if they take the farm away? They won't win. But even if they tried, Elena, you need to understand something. This isn't just about property ownership. This is about proving that you deserve the life Robert and David wanted you to have. This is about showing your children that their mother is strong enough to fight for what's right. He was right. This wasn't just about the farm anymore. This was about everything, my children's future, my own self-worth, the legacy David and Robert had tried to leave us. The Castellanos thought they could intimidate me with lawyers and threats. They thought I was still the broken widow who'd accepted $20 without a fight. They had no idea what they'd just started. But as I watched my children playing in the yard of what might or might not be our new home, I realized that the real battle was just beginning. And this time, I wasn't going to back down. The legal papers arrived 3 days later. I was in the greenhouse, trying to learn the watering schedule for David's heirloom plants, when Tom knocked on the glass door with a grim expression and an official-looking envelope in his hand. "Process server just left," he said simply. My hands were shaking as I opened the documents. Petition to contest will and estate distribution. Motion for temporary restraining order. Request for emergency custody evaluation. That last one made my blood freeze. They're trying to take the children, I whispered. Tom read over my shoulder, his jaw tightening with each page. They're claiming you're an unfit mother because you're living on property you obtained through fraudulent means. They want temporary custody pending the outcome of the will contest. I sank down onto David's bench, the papers scattered around me. They can do that? They can try. But Elena, you need to understand something. This is exactly what Mr. Robert expected them to do. He prepared for this. What do you mean? Tom walked to a filing cabinet in the corner of the greenhouse and pulled out a thick folder. Your father-in-law documented everything. Every conversation with his doctors, every legal consultation, every decision about the farm. He even recorded some of his meetings with the lawyers. He recorded them? Audio recordings, video recordings, written statements. He wanted to make absolutely sure that if his family tried to challenge his decisions, there would be irrefutable proof that he was competent and acting of his own free will. I opened the folder and found dozens of documents. Medical evaluations confirming Robert's mental competency. Legal opinions stating that the property transfer was completely legitimate. Even character references from people I'd never met, all attesting to my integrity and my relationship with Robert. How did he get all of this? He hired a private investigator to document everything. He had the investigator interview your neighbors, your children's teachers, even the grocery store clerks who saw you shopping for his special diet foods. He built a case proving that you were a devoted daughter-in-law and mother, not a manipulative gold digger. But even as Tom was showing me Robert's preparations, my phone was ringing constantly. First Patricia, then Marcus, then Vincent, then lawyers I'd never heard of. Each call was more threatening than the last. Elena, this is ridiculous, Patricia said during one particularly nasty conversation. You know you don't deserve that farm. You know Robert wasn't thinking clearly in his final months. Just sign the property back over to the family, and we'll drop the custody challenge. I'm not signing anything. Then you're going to lose everything. We have witnesses who will testify that you isolated Robert from his family. We have evidence that you controlled his medication and his access to outside communication. That's not true, isn't it? Who answered his phone calls in those final months? Who decided which visitors he was well enough to see? Who managed his medication schedule? I had done all of those things, but not for the reasons Patricia was implying. I'd managed Robert's care because David had asked me to, because Robert needed someone who understood his complex medical needs, because his other relatives lived across the country and visited maybe twice a year. But I was starting to realize how it might look to an outsider. We're going to paint a very clear picture for the judge, Marcus added when he called later that day. A young woman with no money and no family, who moved into a wealthy man's house and gradually took control of every aspect of his life. A woman who isolated him from his real children and convinced him to change his will in her favor. Robert made his own decisions. Did he? Because we have phone records showing that his calls to Patricia and me dropped off dramatically after you moved into the house. We have testimony from his doctors that you were always present during his appointments, always answering questions for him, always speaking on his behalf. I was helping him communicate. He was sick. Or you were controlling the narrative, making sure he only heard what you wanted him to hear. The worst part was that some of what they were saying contained grains of truth. I had been protective of Robert's time and energy. I had screened his phone calls when he was having bad days. I had spoken for him during medical appointments when he was too tired or confused to explain his symptoms clearly. I'd thought I was being a good caregiver. Now they were making it sound like I'd been running a sophisticated manipulation scheme. The pressure was constant. Phone calls, legal documents, threats, and accusations. But the worst part was the way it was affecting the children. Emma had started having nightmares about bad people taking her away from Mommy. Sophie was clinging to me constantly, afraid to let me out of her sight. Lucas had stopped talking almost entirely, and Michael was acting out, throwing tantrums and hitting his siblings. "Mommy, are we going to have to leave the farm?" Emma asked one evening as I was tucking her into bed. "I don't know, sweetheart. I'm trying to make sure we can stay. But why do those people want to take us away from you? How do you explain greed and manipulation to a 4-year-old? How do you tell your children that their grandfather's relatives think they'd be better off separated from their mother and divided among strangers?" "Sometimes adults disagree about what's best for children," I said carefully. "But I want you to know that I'm going to fight very hard to keep our family together. Will you win?" "I'm going to try my best." But privately, I was terrified. The Castellanos had money, lawyers, and a compelling narrative about a manipulative caregiver who'd taken advantage of a sick old man. All I had was the truth, and I was learning that the truth doesn't always win in court. Then Tom showed me something that changed everything. "Elena, there's something else Mr. Robert left for you. Something I wasn't supposed to show you unless the family tried to contest the will." He led me to the barn office and opened a safe I hadn't noticed before. Inside was a video camera and a stack of DVDs labeled with dates from the past 2 years. "What are these?" "Security footage." Mr. Robert had cameras installed throughout the house after David died. He was recording everything. Everything. Every conversation with his family members. Every phone call. Every interaction with you and the children. He wanted proof of how everyone actually behaved when they thought no one was watching. Tom loaded one of the DVDs into the computer, and suddenly I was watching Patricia and Marcus in Robert's study, 3 weeks after David's funeral. "We need to start thinking about the future," Patricia was saying on the screen. "Father's not going to live forever, and we can't let Elena get her hands on the inheritance." "She's not even a real Castellano," Marcus replied. "She's just David's widow. Once Father dies, she has no claim to anything." "But what if Father leaves her something in the will? What if he feels guilty about David's death and tries to provide for her and the children?" "Then we can test it. We prove she manipulated him. It shouldn't be hard. She's been controlling every aspect of his life since she moved in." I watched in horror as they discussed strategies for undermining my relationship with Robert, for documenting my controlling behavior, for building a case that I was an unfit mother who was only interested in the family money. "This was 3 weeks after David died," Tom said quietly. "They were already planning to destroy you before Robert even got sick again." There were hours of footage. Patricia coaching Vincent on what to say to make me look bad. Marcus researching my background, looking for anything they could use against me. All 3 of them discussing how to minimize my inheritance and gain custody of the children. But the most damning footage was from Robert's final weeks. I watched Patricia visit her father for the first time in months, spending exactly 20 minutes with him before launching into a speech about how I was isolating him from his family. I watched Marcus arrive with legal documents, trying to pressure Robert into changing his will while he was weak from chemotherapy. And I watched Robert's responses. "Patricia, Elena has been nothing but devoted to this family," he said firmly in one recording. "She gave up her own life to care for David and me. If you can't see that, then you don't understand what real love looks like. But Father, she's not family. She's more family than any of you have been in the past 2 years. When was the last time you visited? When was the last time you called just to see how I was feeling?" In another recording, Marcus was pressuring Robert to think about the children's future. "I am thinking about their future," Robert replied. "I'm thinking about giving them a mother who's strong enough to build something extraordinary, instead of relatives who only show up when there's money involved." The recordings went on and on. Hours of evidence showing that Robert was completely confident, that he understood exactly what he was doing, and that his family's primary concern was money, not his well-being or the children's welfare. "Elena," Tom said as we finished watching the final DVD, "they don't know these recordings exist." Mr. Robert was very careful about that. He wanted you to have this evidence if you needed it, but he also wanted to see how far they would go with their lies. how far they would go. He wanted to give them enough rope to hang themselves. And based on the legal papers they just filed, I'd say they've done exactly that. I stared at the stack of DVDs, feeling something I hadn't experienced in weeks: hope. Real, solid hope that maybe I could fight back. Maybe I could protect my children and keep the life Robert and David had planned for us. Tom, what do we do with this? We give it to your lawyer. And then we watch the Castellanos case fall apart when they realize they've been caught lying under oath. But even as I felt hope returning, I knew the real battle was just beginning. The Castellanos had made their move, and now it was time for me to make mine. The question was, would Robert's evidence be enough to protect everything he'd tried to give us? The custody hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. 5 days to prepare for the fight of my life. I hired the best family lawyer I could find with the emergency funds Robert had left in the farm account. Sarah Wellington was a small woman with steel in her eyes and a reputation for destroying opponents who underestimated her. Elena, I've reviewed all the evidence Tom provided, she said during our first meeting. The recordings are devastating to their case. But I need you to understand something. They're going to get very ugly before this is over. What do you mean? They're going to attack your character, your parenting, your mental state. They're going to try to make you look unstable and manipulative. Are you prepared for that? I thought about my children, about the farm, about everything David and Robert had sacrificed to give us this chance. I'm prepared for whatever it takes. But I wasn't prepared for what happened next. The morning of the hearing, I woke up to find news vans parked outside the farm. Somehow, the story had leaked to the media, and it was being presented exactly the way the Castellanos wanted it told. Local woman accused of manipulating elderly man for inheritance read the headline on the morning news. Custody battle erupts over suspicious will. The reporter was standing at the end of our driveway, speaking directly to the camera. Elena Martinez, a 28-year-old widow with 4 young children, is accused of isolating her wealthy father-in-law and manipulating him into leaving her a multi-million-dollar farm. The deceased man's children claim she controlled his medication and prevented them from visiting during his final illness. I watched in horror as they showed old photos of Robert's mansion, then cut to footage of our modest farmhouse, making it look like I'd somehow stolen a fortune and was living in luxury while his real family suffered. The children are asking questions, Tom said quietly as we watched from the kitchen window. Emma wants to know why there are cameras outside. I looked at my 4 babies, who were eating breakfast and trying to understand why strangers were taking pictures of their new home. They looked scared and confused, and I felt rage building in my chest like a fire. Tom, can you keep the children inside today? I don't want them to see any of this. Of course. But Elena, you should know, there are more reporters at the courthouse. This is going to be a circus. He was right. When Sarah and I arrived at the courthouse, there were at least a dozen news crews waiting. Cameras flashed as we walked up the steps, and reporters shouted questions about my relationship with Robert, about the farm, about whether I'd really manipulated a dying man. But the worst part was seeing Patricia, Marcus, and Vincent on the courthouse steps, giving interviews and playing the role of grieving family members who'd been betrayed by a conniving outsider. Our father was a generous man who trusted easily, Patricia was telling a reporter. Elena took advantage of his grief over losing David. She isolated him from his real children and convinced him that we didn't care about him. What evidence do you have of this manipulation? The reporter asked. Phone records showing that our calls to him dropped off dramatically after she moved in. Medical records showing that she controlled his medication schedule. Witness testimony from household staff who saw her preventing us from visiting. I wanted to scream. Every word was a distortion of the truth, but it sounded so convincing when presented that way. Inside the courtroom, things got worse. The Castellanos' lawyer was a sharp-dressed man named Richard Blackstone who specialized in high-stakes inheritance disputes. He painted a picture of me as a calculating woman who'd seen an opportunity and seized it. Your Honor, the The evidence will show that Ms. Martinez systematically isolated Robert Castellano from his family, controlled his access to outside communication, and manipulated him during his most vulnerable moments. She moved into his home under the pretense of caring for him, but her real goal was to position herself as the primary beneficiary of his estate. He presented phone records showing that Robert's calls to his children had decreased after I moved in. He showed medical records indicating that I'd been present at every doctor's appointment and had often answered questions on Robert's behalf. He even had testimony from a housekeeper who claimed I'd told her not to let Patricia and Marcus visit without calling first. Everything he said was technically true, but stripped of context, it made me sound like a master manipulator. Then Patricia took the stand. My father was never the same after David died, she testified, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. He was consumed with guilt, convinced that David's death was somehow his fault. Elena encouraged that guilt. She made him feel like she and the children were his responsibility, like he owed them something. Did you try to maintain contact with your father during this period? Blackstone asked. We tried constantly. But Elena controlled his phone, his schedule, his medication. When we did manage to visit, she was always there, always listening, always speaking for him. It was like she was afraid to let him talk to us alone. And what was your father's mental state during this time? He was confused, grieving, heavily medicated. He wasn't thinking clearly. Elena took advantage of that vulnerability. I watched the judge's face as Patricia spoke, and I could see doubt creeping in. Without context, without the recordings, her testimony sounded believable. Then it was Sarah's turn to cross-examine. Ms. Castellano, how often did you visit your father in the 2 years before his death? Patricia shifted uncomfortably. We live across the country. It's not easy to travel frequently. I didn't ask about the difficulty. I asked how often. Can you give the court specific dates? I visited several times. According to phone records, you called your father exactly 12 times in the 2 years before his death. You visited him 4 times for a total of 8 days. Does that sound like someone who was trying to maintain close contact? We have busy lives. We have our own families to care for. But you expect the court to believe that you were concerned about your father being isolated when you yourself made no effort to spend time with him? Sarah was just getting started. She presented evidence of the Castellanos' financial situations, Patricia's struggling business, Marcus's recent divorce and alimony payments, Vincent's gambling debts. She showed that all 3 of them had been counting on Robert's inheritance to solve their money problems. But then Blackstone played his trump card. Your Honor, I'd like to call Dr. Margaret Foster to the stand. Dr. Foster was a psychiatrist who specialized in elder abuse cases. She'd never met Robert, but she'd reviewed his medical records and formed an opinion about his mental state. Based on my review of Mr. Castellano's medical history, including his cancer diagnosis, his grief over his son's death, and his heavy medication regimen, it's my professional opinion that he was in a highly vulnerable psychological state during his final months. Patients in this condition are extremely susceptible to manipulation by caregivers who control their daily environment. In your opinion, Doctor, would Mr. Castellano have been capable of making sound financial decisions during this period? It's highly unlikely. The combination of grief, illness, and medication would have severely impaired his judgment. Any major financial decisions made during this time should be viewed with extreme skepticism. I felt the courtroom tilting against me. This woman had never met Robert, had never seen him interact with me or the children, but her testimony sounded authoritative and damning. Then Sarah stood up for redirect. Dr. Foster, did you review any video evidence of Mr. Castellano's interactions during this period? No, there was no video evidence provided. Did you interview anyone who spent significant time with Mr. Castellano during his final months? No, I based my opinion solely on the medical records. So your testimony is based entirely on theoretical assumptions about how a patient in Mr. Castellano's condition might behave, not on any direct observation of his actual behavior? That's correct. Thank you, doctor. No further questions. But the damage was done. I could see it in the judge's face, in the way the court reporter was looking at me, in the whispers from the gallery where reporters were taking notes. Then came the moment that nearly destroyed me. Blackstone called Emma to the stand. My 4-year-old daughter, looking tiny and scared in the witness chair, was asked to describe her life at the farm. Do you like living at the farm, Emma? Blackstone asked gently. Yes, but wouldn't you like to have more family around? Wouldn't you like to live with your Aunt Patricia and have cousins to play with? Emma looked confused. I want to stay with Mommy. But what if Mommy can't take care of you anymore? What if she's too sad or too busy with the farm? Objection. Sarah stood up. Counsel is leading the witness and asking hypothetical questions inappropriate for a child this age. Sustained, the judge said. But the question had been asked, and I could see Emma's face crumpling with confusion and fear. Emma, Blackstone continued, has Mommy ever told you that you might have to go live with other people? She said the bad people want to take us away, Emma whispered. The bad people? Is that what Mommy calls your Aunt Patricia and Uncle Marcus? I wanted to jump up and scream. I'd never called them bad people in front of the children. I'd tried to shield them from the entire situation. But now my attempt to protect them was being twisted into evidence that I was poisoning them against their relatives. I want my Mommy, Emma started crying. I want to go home. The judge called a recess, and I rushed to comfort my daughter, but the damage was done. The image of a confused, frightened child asking for her mother while lawyers argued over her future was exactly what the Castellanos wanted the court to see. During the break, Sarah pulled me aside. Elena, we need to play the recordings. Now, before this gets any worse. But you said we should save them for the end. That was before they put your daughter on the stand. The judge is starting to believe their narrative. We need to show him the truth before he makes a decision we can't appeal. When court resumed, Sarah stood up with a stack of DVDs. Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence that completely contradicts the testimony we've heard today. Evidence that Mr. Castellano himself provided, because he anticipated exactly this kind of challenge to his final wishes. Blackstone objected, but the judge allowed the evidence. Sarah loaded the first DVD into the courtroom's video system. Suddenly, Robert's voice filled the courtroom. Patricia, Elena has been nothing but devoted to this family. She gave up her own life to care for David and me. If you can't see that, then you don't understand what real love looks like. The courtroom went dead silent. On the screen, we could see Patricia arguing with her father, trying to convince him that I was manipulating him, while Robert defended me with perfect clarity and obvious frustration. Sarah played recording after recording. Robert discussing his estate plans with complete mental clarity. Patricia and Marcus plotting to contest the will before Robert was even dead. Vincent researching ways to prove I was an unfit mother. The most devastating recording was from just 2 weeks before Robert died. I know my family thinks I'm not thinking clearly, Robert said directly to the camera. So I want to state, for the record, that I am of sound mind and body. I understand exactly what I'm doing with my estate. Elena Martinez has been the most devoted daughter-in-law any man could ask for. She deserves everything I'm giving her and more. My biological children have shown me their true priorities, and those priorities are money, not family. When the recordings finished, the courtroom was silent except for the sound of Patricia crying, not tears of grief, but tears of rage and humiliation. The judge looked at the Castellanos table with obvious disgust. Mr. Blackstone, did your clients know these recordings existed when they filed their petition? No, Your Honor. So they were prepared to testify under oath that Mr. Castellano was mentally incompetent, despite evidence that he was lucid enough to anticipate and prepare for exactly this kind of challenge? Blackstone had no answer. The judge turned to Patricia. Ms. Castellano, you testified that you were concerned about your father's welfare and that Ms. Martinez prevented you from visiting. Yet these recordings show you discussing strategies to undermine her relationship with your father and gain control of his estate. Would you like to explain this discrepancy? Patricia's lawyer whispered something in her ear, and she invoked her Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. The judge's decision was swift and decisive. The petition to contest the will is denied. The motion for emergency custody is denied. Furthermore, this court finds that the petitioners have engaged in a pattern of harassment and false accusations against Ms. Martinez. I'm issuing a restraining order preventing any member of the Castellano family from contacting Ms. Martinez or her children, and I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office for possible perjury charges. I collapsed into my chair, shaking with relief and exhaustion. We'd won. The farm was safe. My children were safe. But as we left the courthouse, I realized that winning the legal battle was just the beginning. The Castellanos had been publicly humiliated, their lies exposed for the world to see. They'd lost not just the inheritance they'd been counting on, but their reputations and their dignity. People like that don't just disappear quietly. They regroup, and they come back harder. The real war was just beginning. The victory should have felt sweeter. Instead, it felt like the calm before a hurricane. 3 days after the court ruling, I woke up to find our farm's main water line had been cut. Tom discovered it when he went to check on the cattle and found them without water. This wasn't an accident, he said grimly, showing me the clean slice through the pipe. Someone did this deliberately. Could it have been the Castellanos? They're under a restraining order. But that doesn't mean they can't hire people to do their dirty work. The water line was just the beginning. Over the next week, our farm became the target of a systematic campaign of sabotage. The Organic Certification Office received an anonymous complaint about our livestock conditions, triggering a surprise inspection. Someone called Child Protective Services claiming they'd seen the children playing unsupervised near dangerous farm equipment. The local newspaper received a tip about suspicious financial activity at Millbrook Farm. Each incident was small enough to seem like coincidence, but together they painted a picture of escalating harassment. They're trying to make you look unstable, Sarah explained during an emergency meeting. If they can't win in court, they'll try to destroy your reputation and your business until you give up and leave. But the restraining order covers direct contact. It doesn't cover anonymous tips to government agencies or hiring private investigators to dig up dirt on you. The pressure was constant and exhausting. Every morning brought a new crisis, a new inspection, a new accusation to defend against. I was spending more time dealing with bureaucrats and investigators than actually running the farm. The children could sense something was wrong. They'd started having nightmares again, and Emma had developed a stutter that appeared whenever strangers came to the house. "Mommy, why do the bad people keep coming here?" she asked one evening after a CPS worker had spent 3 hours interviewing each child separately. "They're not bad people, sweetheart. They're just doing their jobs, making sure you're safe and happy. But we are safe and happy. Why don't they believe us? How do you explain to a 4-year-old that some adults use children as weapons in their wars against other adults?" The worst part was that the harassment was working. The constant stress was affecting my judgment, my health, my ability to focus on the farm. I was making mistakes, forgetting to submit paperwork, missing deadlines, snapping at Tom when he was just trying to help. "Elena, you need to take a break," he said after I'd spent an entire morning crying over a rejected organic certification renewal. "This is exactly what they want, to push you until you break." "I can't take a break. If I stop fighting, they win. If you collapse from exhaustion, they also win." But I couldn't stop. Every time I tried to rest, another crisis would emerge. The grocery store contracts were being reviewed due to concerns about farm management. The bank was asking questions about the source of our startup funds. The county was threatening to revoke our business license over a zoning complaint. Then came the news that nearly destroyed me. I was in the greenhouse, trying to salvage some of David's heirloom tomatoes that had been damaged during the latest inspection, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. Ms. Martinez? This is Detective Rodriguez with the County Sheriff's Office. We need to speak with you about some allegations that have been made. My blood went cold. What kind of allegations? We've received a complaint that you may have been involved in elder abuse. Specifically, that you may have hastened Robert Castellano's death through medication tampering. The phone slipped from my hand and crashed to the greenhouse floor. Medication tampering. They were accusing me of murder. Ms. Martinez? Are you there? I picked up the phone with shaking hands. I'm here. We'd like you to come in for questioning. You're not under arrest, but I'd strongly recommend bringing a lawyer. The next few hours passed in a blur of panic and disbelief. Sarah met me at the sheriff's office, her face grim with the knowledge that this was exactly what she'd been afraid of. Elena, they don't have enough evidence to arrest you, or they would have done it already. This is a fishing expedition. Answer their questions honestly, but don't volunteer any information they don't specifically ask for. The interrogation room was small and windowless, with fluorescent lights that made everything look sickly and harsh. Detective Rodriguez was a middle-aged man with kind eyes, but his partner, Detective Walsh, looked at me like I was already guilty. Ms. Martinez, we understand you were responsible for managing Mr. Castellano's medication during his final illness, Rodriguez began. I helped him keep track of his pills, yes. He had a complex regimen, and sometimes he forgot what he'd already taken. Did you ever give him medication without his knowledge? No, never. Did you ever alter his medication in any way? No. Walsh leaned forward. Ms. Martinez, we have a witness who says they saw you crushing pills and mixing them into Mr. Castellano's food. My heart stopped. That's not true. So you never crushed any of his medications? Sometimes his pain pills were too big for him to swallow when he was nauseous. His doctor told me it was okay to crush them and mix them with applesauce. Walsh made a note. So you did alter his medication. I followed his doctor's instructions exactly. Do you have documentation of these instructions? I tried to remember. Had Dr. Peterson written down the instructions about crushing the pills, or had he just told me verbally during one of Robert's appointments? I think it was verbal instructions. You think? Sarah put her hand on my arm. My client has answered your questions. Unless you have evidence of actual wrongdoing, we're leaving. But the damage was done. By the time we left the sheriff's office, I felt like a criminal. Every interaction with Robert's medication was now suspect in my mind. Had I made mistakes? Had I given him the wrong dosage? Had my attempts to help him manage his pain somehow contributed to his death? The local news picked up the story that evening. Widow under investigation for possible elder abuse, the headline read. Police question woman who inherited millions from father-in-law. They showed my photo next to Robert's, making it look like a crime scene investigation. They interviewed experts who talked about how easy it would be for a caregiver to overdose an elderly patient without detection. I sat in my kitchen, watching my reputation being destroyed on live television, while my children played in the next room, oblivious to the fact that their mother was being painted as a potential murderer. The phone started ringing immediately. Reporters wanting statements. Neighbors asking if the allegations were true. Even some of the farm workers calling to ask if they should look for other jobs. Elena, Tom said quietly, maybe you should consider taking the children and going away for a while. Let this blow over. Go where? This is our home. This is what David and Robert wanted for us. David and Robert wanted you to be safe and happy. They didn't want you to be destroyed by their family's greed. But I couldn't leave. Leaving would look like an admission of guilt. It would prove to everyone that the Castellanos had been right about me all along. That night, I lay awake listening to the sounds of the farm, the cattle lowing in the distance, the wind through the oak trees, the old house settling around us. This place was supposed to be our sanctuary, our fresh start, our chance at the life David and Robert had dreamed of for us. Instead, it was becoming our prison. The next morning brought the worst news yet. Sarah called at 6 a.m., her voice tight with controlled anger. "Elena, I just got word from the district attorney's office. They're convening a grand jury to investigate Robert's death." "What does that mean?" "It means they're going to present evidence to a group of citizens who will decide whether there's enough probable cause to indict you for murder." The word hit me like a physical blow. Murder. They were actually considering charging me with murdering the man who'd been like a father to me, who'd given me everything, who'd trusted me with his final wishes. "Sarah, what happens if they indict me?" "Then you'll be arrested and charged with a felony. Even if you're eventually acquitted, the trial could take years. And Elena, if you're charged with murder, CPS will almost certainly remove the children from your custody pending the outcome." I sank down onto the kitchen floor, my legs unable to support me anymore. Everything Robert and David had worked for, everything they'd sacrificed to give us, was about to be destroyed by the very people they'd tried to protect us from. The Castellanos had found a way to take everything after all. And the worst part was, I was starting to wonder if maybe they were right. Maybe I didn't deserve the farm, the inheritance, the life Robert had tried to give me. Maybe I really was just a naive woman who'd gotten in over her head and somehow caused the death of a man who'd trusted me. As I sat on my kitchen floor, listening to my children getting ready for breakfast in the next room, I realized that the Castellanos had accomplished something even more devastating than taking away our home. They'd made me doubt myself. And once you start doubting yourself, you've already lost. The grand jury was scheduled to convene in 2 weeks. 2 weeks to decide whether I would spend the rest of my life fighting murder charges while my children grew up in foster care. I was sitting in the greenhouse, staring at David's withering heirloom plants, when Tom found me. "Elena, there's someone here to see you. If it's another reporter or investigator, tell them I'm not available." "It's not. It's Dr. Peterson, Robert's oncologist." Dr. Peterson was a soft-spoken man in his 60s who'd treated Robert throughout his cancer battle. I'd sat through dozens of appointments with him, watching him explain treatment options and prognosis with gentle honesty. "Elena," he said as he sat down across from me in the greenhouse, "I heard about the investigation. I wanted you to know that I've already spoken to the police." My heart sank. About the medication? About everything. About Robert's condition, about his treatment, about the instructions I gave you for managing his care. He paused. "Elena, I want you to understand something. Robert Castellano died exactly when and how we expected him to. His cancer had metastasized to his liver and lungs. He had weeks to live, maybe days. Nothing you did or didn't do changed that outcome. But the medication. The medication you gave him was exactly what I prescribed, and exactly the doses I recommended. The instructions about crushing his pain pills when he couldn't swallow them? I documented those in his medical chart. The police have copies of everything." I stared at him. "Then why are they investigating me?" "Because someone filed a complaint claiming you might have overdosed him." "But Elena, I reviewed every medication Robert received in his final weeks. There's no evidence of overdose, no evidence of tampering, no evidence of anything except a devoted caregiver following medical instructions to help a dying man be comfortable. Will you testify to that?" "I already have. I gave a sworn statement to the district attorney's office yesterday. I told them that any charges against you would be not just unfounded, but cruel and ridiculous." For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. "Dr. Peterson, thank you. I've been so scared that maybe I did something wrong that maybe. Elena, you did everything right. Robert was lucky to have you caring for him. His family should be thanking you, not trying to destroy you." After Dr. Peterson left, I walked through the farm with a clearer head than I'd had in weeks. The cattle were healthy and well-fed. The vegetable crops were thriving. The organic certification was back on track. Despite all the harassment and sabotage, Tom and I had managed to keep the operation running. But I was exhausted. Bone deep, soul-crushing exhausted. That evening, as I was tucking the children into bed, Emma asked me a question that broke my heart. "Mommy, are you going to go to jail?" "What?" "Sweetheart, why would you ask that?" "I heard you talking to the lawyer lady. She said something about jail." I sat down on her bed and pulled her close. "Emma, sometimes adults have disagreements about things. But I want you to know that I haven't done anything wrong, and I'm going to fight very hard to make sure our family stays together. But what if the bad people win? What if the bad people win?" It was the question that had been haunting me for weeks. "Then we'll figure out a way to be okay anyway," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. But that night, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling, I faced the impossible choice that had been building for weeks. I could keep fighting. I could go through the grand jury process, potentially face criminal charges, risk losing my children, and spend years in legal battles that would drain every penny Robert had left us. Or I could give up. I could sign the farm back over to the Castellanos, take my children, and disappear somewhere they'd never find us. Start over with nothing, but at least start over free. The next morning, I called Sarah and asked her to set up a meeting with the Castellanos lawyer. "Elena, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking about ending this before it destroys what's left of my family." "You can't be serious." "We're winning. Dr. Peterson's testimony will kill their case." "Are we winning?" "Because it doesn't feel like winning. It feels like drowning." The meeting was set for the following afternoon at a neutral location, a conference room in downtown law offices. Patricia, Marcus, and Vincent arrived with their lawyer, looking like they'd already won. "Elena," Patricia said with false sympathy, "I'm so glad you've finally come to your senses." "I haven't agreed to anything yet." Blackstone slid a document across the table. "This is a simple property transfer agreement. You sign the farm back over to the Castellano Family Trust, and in exchange, all legal actions against you are dropped. The investigation ends, the custody challenges disappear, and you're free to start fresh somewhere else." I stared at the document. "What about the children's inheritance?" "The children will receive a trust fund that will pay for their education and provide them with a modest inheritance when they turn 21, Marcus said. "They'll be taken care of." "How modest?" $50,000 each. I almost laughed. Robert's estate was worth over $50 million, and they were offering my children $50,000 each, less than what some people spend on a car. "That's insulting." "It's generous, considering they're not blood relatives," Patricia replied coldly. "They're Robert's grandchildren. They're David's children. And David is dead." The casual cruelty of that statement hit me like a slap. These people had no love for my children, no interest in their welfare. They saw them as obstacles to their inheritance, nothing more. "Elena," Vincent said, leaning forward with what he probably thought was a reasonable expression, "you have to think about what's best for the children. Do you really want them to grow up with a mother who's under constant investigation? Do you want them to remember their childhood as a series of court battles and police interviews? I want them to grow up knowing their mother fought for what was right." "And what if you lose?" Patricia asked. "What if you're convicted? What happens to them then?" It was the question I'd been avoiding, the nightmare scenario that woke me up in cold sweats. "The offer won't be available forever," Blackstone said. "The grand jury convenes in 10 days. Once they issue an indictment, this deal is off the table." I looked around the table at these people who'd spent months trying to destroy me, who'd used my children as weapons, who'd turned my grief into a legal battlefield. "I need time to think." "You have 48 hours, Patricia said. After that, we proceed with the criminal case." I left that meeting feeling like I was carrying the weight of the world. 48 hours to decide between fighting for everything Robert and David had wanted for us, or protecting my children from a battle that might destroy us all. That night, I sat in David's greenhouse, surrounded by his dying plants, and tried to imagine what he would want me to do. Fight for the farm and risk losing the children? or sacrifice the farm to keep the family together. I was still sitting there when Tom found me at midnight. Elena, you look like you're carrying the weight of the world. I am. I told him about the meeting, about the choice I had to make, about the 48-hour deadline. Tom listened without interrupting, then sat quietly for a long moment. Elena, can I tell you something about Mr. Robert that you might not know? I nodded. When he first bought this farm, he told me something. He said, Tom, I'm not just buying Elena a farm. I'm buying her the chance to discover how strong she really is. He said he knew his family would try to destroy you, and he wanted to see if you'd fight back. He wanted to see if I'd fight back? He said you'd spent so many years taking care of other people that you'd forgotten how to fight for yourself. He thought maybe losing everything and having to fight to get it back would remind you who you really are. I stared at Tom. Are you saying he expected this to happen? I'm saying he prepared for it. Elena, there's something else he left for you. Something I wasn't supposed to show you unless you were ready to give up. Tom walked to the filing cabinet and pulled out one final envelope, sealed and marked for Elena, when she needs to remember. Inside was a single sheet of paper in Robert's handwriting. Elena, if you're reading this, then my family has done exactly what I expected them to do. They've tried to break you, to make you doubt yourself, to convince you that you don't deserve the life I've given you. But here's what I know about you that they don't. You're stronger than you think you are. You're braver than you believe. And you're exactly the kind of person who deserves to win. Don't let them take what's yours. Don't let them convince you that keeping your family together means giving up your dreams. Fight for both. Fight for everything. The children need to see their mother stand up for what's right. They need to learn that sometimes the hardest battles are the ones most worth fighting. You are not alone in this. You never were. Now go show them what a real Castellano looks like. Robert. I read the letter 3 times, feeling something I hadn't experienced in weeks, certainty. Robert was right. I'd spent so long taking care of other people that I'd forgotten how to fight for myself. But my children were watching, learning what it meant to face adversity. Did I want to teach them that when bullies attack, you give them what they want? Or did I want to teach them that sometimes you have to stand up and fight, even when the odds are against you? I looked at Tom. Call Sarah. Tell her the deal is off. Are you sure? I'm sure. We're not giving up. We're going to fight this all the way to the end. Even if it means risking everything? Especially if it means risking everything. Because that's what real strength looks like. The next morning, I called Blackstone's office and delivered a simple message. The farm is not for sale. See you in court. The war was far from over. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I was fighting from a position of strength instead of fear. The Castellanos wanted a battle. They were about to get one. The grand jury session was scheduled for a Thursday morning. On Wednesday night, I couldn't sleep. I was pacing the farmhouse kitchen at 2 a.m. when my phone rang. Sarah's name appeared on the screen. Elena, I'm sorry to call so late, but something's happened. Something big. What kind of something? The district attorney just called me. They're dropping the investigation. I sank into a chair. What? Why? Dr. Peterson wasn't the only doctor who came forward. Apparently, 3 other physicians who treated Robert have given statements confirming that his death was completely consistent with end-stage cancer. But more importantly, someone else came forward with information. Who? Robert's private nurse. The one who worked the night shift during his final weeks. She's been out of the country visiting family, but she just returned and heard about the investigation. Elena. She kept detailed logs of every medication Robert received, every symptom he experienced, every conversation she witnessed. My hands were shaking. And her logs prove that you followed medical protocols exactly. But more than that, she recorded conversations between Patricia and Marcus where they discussed their plan to frame you for Robert's death if the will contest didn't work. I couldn't breathe. They planned this. According to the nurse, Patricia explicitly said that if they couldn't prove you manipulated Robert while he was alive, they'd claim you killed him. She has it all documented, Elena. Dates, times, exact quotes. So it's over? The criminal investigation is over. But Elena, there's more. The district attorney is now investigating the Castellanos for filing false police reports and conspiracy. They could be facing criminal charges themselves. I hung up the phone and sat in my dark kitchen, trying to process what I'd just learned. The nightmare was ending, but not the way I'd expected. The next morning, Tom found me in the greenhouse, finally able to tend to David's plants without the weight of potential murder charges hanging over my head. Elena, you have visitors. Please tell me it's not more reporters. It's not. It's the Castellanos. I looked up sharply. They're violating the restraining order. They're with their lawyer and a sheriff's deputy. They want to talk. I found them waiting in the farmhouse living room, looking nothing like the confident, threatening people who'd tried to destroy me. Patricia's face was pale and drawn. Marcus kept fidgeting with his hands. Vincent wouldn't make eye contact. Blackstone looked like he'd aged 10 years since our last meeting. Ms. Martinez, he began, my clients would like to make a statement. I'm listening. Patricia stood up, her voice barely above a whisper. Elena, we want to apologize. I stared at her. Apologize. We were wrong. About everything. About you, about Father's will, about the accusations we made. She was crying now, real tears this time. We let our grief and our financial problems cloud our judgment. Your financial problems? Marcus cleared his throat. Elena, we need you to understand something. When Father died, we were all in serious debt. Patricia's business was failing. I was going through an expensive divorce. Vincent had gambling debts. We were counting on the inheritance to save us. So you decided to destroy me instead? We convinced ourselves that you had manipulated Father, Vincent said quietly. It was easier than admitting that he chose you over us, because we'd been terrible children to him. Patricia wiped her eyes. The recordings you played in court, hearing Father defend you, hearing him talk about how devoted you'd been, we realized that everything he said about us was true. We had abandoned him. We only cared about his money. And the murder accusations? The three siblings exchanged glances, and I could see shame written across their faces. That was my idea, Patricia admitted. I thought if we could make you look like a criminal, we could still contest the will. I convinced Marcus and Vincent to go along with it. You tried to have me arrested for murder because you wanted money? We were desperate, Marcus said. But Elena, we know now that what we did was unforgivable. We're not here to ask for your forgiveness. We're here to try to make things right. Blackstone pulled out a stack of documents. Ms. Martinez, my clients are prepared to sign a formal apology acknowledging that all their accusations against you were false. They're also prepared to pay for any legal expenses you've incurred defending yourself. And they're dropping all claims to the farm and formally acknowledging your right to Robert's inheritance. I looked at these three people who'd spent months trying to destroy my life, who'd used my children as weapons, who'd nearly succeeded in taking everything Robert and David had worked to give us. Why now? Why are you doing this? Patricia's voice broke. Because we heard the nurse's recordings. We heard ourselves planning to frame you for murder. We heard how cold we sounded, how calculating. Elena, we didn't recognize ourselves. And because the district attorney made it clear that if we don't make this right, we'll be facing criminal charges ourselves, Vincent added with brutal honesty. So this is about saving yourselves. Partly, Marcus admitted. But also because we finally listened to those recordings of Father defending you. Really listened. And we realized that he was right about everything. About you, about us, about what family really means. I walked to the window and looked out at the farm, the fields David had dreamed of, the greenhouse he'd designed, the life Robert had made possible for us. What about the children? You wanted to split them up, take them away from me. We were wrong about that too, Patricia said. Elena, your children are happy here. They're thriving. They belong with you. I turned back to face them. I want something else. What? I want you to tell the children the truth. I want you to explain to them why you tried to take them away from me, and I want you to apologize to them. The three siblings looked stricken, but they nodded. An hour later, we were all sitting in the farmhouse living room while Emma, Sophie, Lucas, and Michael listened to their great-aunt and uncles explain why they'd been confused and made mistakes about what was best for the family. We thought we knew better than your mommy about how to take care of you, Patricia told them gently. But we were wrong. Your mommy is the best person to take care of you, and this farm is the best place for you to grow up. Are you still the bad people? Emma asked with 4-year-old directness. Patricia smiled through her tears. We were the bad people, sweetheart. But we're trying to be better now. After the Castellanos left, I sat on the farmhouse porch with Tom, watching my children play in the yard. So it's really over, he asked. It's really over. What are you going to do now? I thought about Robert's letter, about David's greenhouse, about the life they'd both envisioned for us. I'm going to build the farm they dreamed of. I'm going to raise my children here. And I'm going to prove that sometimes the people who try to destroy you end up making you stronger. And the Castellanos? They'll have to live with what they did. But Elena, I think they learned something important about themselves. Sometimes that's the best punishment of all. That evening, I walked through David's greenhouse, looking at the heirloom plants that were finally starting to thrive again. I thought about the journey that had brought us here, from $20 and a broken family to a thriving farm and a future full of possibilities. The Castellanos had tried to break me, but instead they'd taught me something valuable. I was stronger than I'd ever imagined. Strong enough to fight for what was right. Strong enough to protect my children. Strong enough to build the life David and Robert had dreamed of for us. As I locked up the greenhouse and headed back to the house, I could hear my children's laughter drifting from their bedrooms. They were safe, they were happy, and they were home. The war was over. And we had won. But more importantly, we'd learned that sometimes the greatest victories come not from defeating your enemies, but from discovering that you're stronger than you ever knew you could be. The farm was ours. The future was ours. And nothing would ever take that away from us again. 6 months later, I was standing in the same courthouse where I'd nearly lost everything, but this time I was there for a very different reason. The local agricultural association was presenting me with their Sustainable Farmer of the Year award. Millbrook Farm had become the most successful organic operation in 3 counties, and our heirloom vegetable program was being featured in national farming magazines. Elena Martinez has proven that sustainable agriculture isn't just environmentally responsible, it's profitable, the association president announced to the packed auditorium. Her innovative approach to heritage seed preservation and organic dairy production has created a model that farms across the country are now trying to replicate. As I accepted the award, I looked out at the audience and saw faces that told the story of how much had changed. Tom and his wife were beaming with pride. Dr. Peterson was there, along with several other doctors who'd supported me during the investigation. Sarah Wellington was in the front row, grinning like she'd won the case all over again. And in the back, almost hidden behind a pillar, I spotted Patricia Castellano. After the ceremony, she approached me hesitantly. Elena, I hope it's okay that I came. I wanted to see you receive this recognition. It's fine, Patricia. How are you doing? She looked older, more fragile than the sharp-edged woman who'd tried to destroy me. I'm getting by. I started seeing a therapist after everything that happened, trying to understand how I became the kind of person who could do what I did to you. And what have you learned? That grief and fear can make you into someone you don't recognize. That money can't replace the relationships you've destroyed. That my father was right about what really matters in life. She paused, looking around the courthouse lobby where we'd fought our legal battles. Elena, I know I have no right to ask this, but would you consider letting me be part of the children's lives? Not as someone trying to take them away, but as their great aunt who wants to make amends. I studied her face, looking for any sign of the calculating woman who'd tried to frame me for murder. All I saw was genuine remorse and a lonely woman who'd finally realized what she'd lost. We can start slowly. Maybe a phone call once a month. See how it goes. Her eyes filled with tears. Thank you. That's more than I deserve. Patricia, we're family. Complicated, messy, sometimes terrible family, but family nonetheless. Robert would have wanted us to find a way forward. As I drove home to the farm, I thought about how much had changed since that devastating day in the lawyer's office when I'd been handed $20 and told I was worthless. The farm was thriving beyond even Robert's projections. Our organic produce was sold out before harvest every season. The dairy operation was expanding to meet demand from high-end restaurants. David's heirloom seed program had attracted attention from agricultural universities who wanted to partner with us on research projects. But more importantly, my children were flourishing. Emma had overcome her stutter and was now the most talkative 4-year-old in her preschool class. Sophie had developed a passion for helping with the animals and announced daily that she was going to be a veterinarian when she grew up. Lucas had found his voice again and spent hours following Tom around, learning about farm equipment and crop rotation. Michael had channeled his energy into helping me in the greenhouse, showing an intuitive understanding of plant care that reminded me of David. They were growing up knowing that their mother had fought for them, that she'd refused to give up when things looked impossible, that she'd built something extraordinary with her own hands. That evening, as we sat around the dinner table in our farmhouse kitchen, Emma asked the question that had become our family tradition. Mommy, tell us again about how we got our farm. I looked at my 4 beautiful children, healthy and happy and secure in the life Robert and David had made possible for us. Well, it started with $20 and a broken heart. I began, the same way I always did. But it ended with us learning that sometimes the worst things that happen to you are actually the beginning of the best things. And we're never leaving, right? Sophie asked. Never, I promised. This is our home. This is where we belong. After the children were in bed, I walked out to David's greenhouse, now expanded and filled with thriving plants from around the world. I'd kept his original heirloom varieties, but I'd also added my own research projects, drought-resistant vegetables, high-nutrition crops, plants that could help feed the world while protecting the environment. I pulled out my phone and opened the video app I'd been using to document our journey. Hey everyone, Elena here from Millbrook Farm. I know many of you have been following our story, and I wanted to give you an update on how we're doing 6 months after everything that happened. I'd started making videos about sustainable farming techniques, but they'd evolved into something more, a chronicle of rebuilding your life after devastating loss, of fighting for what's right even when the odds are against you, of discovering strength you never knew you had. The farm is doing incredibly well. We're now supplying organic produce to over 50 restaurants and grocery stores across 3 states. The children are thriving in their new school, and we've become part of an amazing rural community that supported us every step of the way. I paused, looking around the greenhouse that represented everything David and Robert had dreamed of for us. But I think the most important thing I've learned is that sometimes the people who try to destroy you are actually doing you a favor. They're forcing you to discover who you really are when everything is stripped away. They're teaching you that you're stronger than you ever imagined. I walked outside and pointed the camera toward the farmhouse, where warm light glowed in the windows. The Castellanos thought they were taking everything away from me when they left me with $20. They had no idea they were actually giving me the greatest gift possible, the chance to build something extraordinary from nothing, to prove to my children that their mother is someone worth believing in. I ended the video and posted it to my growing social media following. Thousands of people had been following our story, finding inspiration in our journey from devastation to triumph. My phone immediately started buzzing with comments and messages. Single mothers facing their own battles. Farmers dealing with family disputes over land. People who'd been betrayed by those they trusted most. Your story gives me hope, one message read. I'm going through my own custody battle, and seeing how you fought for your children helps me keep going. I inherited my grandfather's farm, and my relatives are trying to contest the will, another person wrote. Your videos are teaching me how to fight back. As I read through the messages, I realized that our story had become bigger than just our family. It had become a symbol of what's possible when you refuse to let other people define your worth, when you fight for what's right even when it seems impossible. I was about to put my phone away when one final message caught my attention. Elena, this is Marcus Castellano. I know I have no right to contact you, but I wanted you to know that watching your success has inspired me to make changes in my own life. I'm in therapy, I'm rebuilding my relationship with my children, and I'm trying to become the kind of person my father would have been proud of. Thank you for showing me what real strength looks like. I smiled and typed back a simple response. We're all capable of change, Marcus. It's never too late to become who you're meant to be. As I walked back toward the farmhouse, I thought about the future. The children would grow up here, learning about hard work and perseverance and the satisfaction of building something with your own hands. They'd go to college if they wanted to, but they'd always have this place to come home to. Maybe one day they'd take over the farm themselves. Maybe they'd pursue other dreams. Either way, they'd know that they came from strength, that their mother had faced the worst kind of betrayal and emerged victorious. I paused on the farmhouse porch and looked back at the land that had become our salvation. In the distance, I could see the lights of Tom's house, where he and his wife were probably settling in for the evening. Beyond that, the field stretched out under a canopy of stars, rich with the promise of next season's harvest. This was what Robert and David had envisioned for us. Not just a farm, but a legacy. Not just a business, but a way of life that honored the land and the people who worked it. The woman who'd accepted $20 and nearly lost her children was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who learned that your worth isn't determined by what others think of you, but by what you're willing to fight for. I opened the farmhouse door and stepped inside, where my children were sleeping peacefully in their beds, secure in the knowledge that they were loved, protected, and home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to prove that the life we'd built here was just the beginning of our story. But tonight, I was simply grateful. Grateful for the journey that had brought us here, grateful for the people who'd tried to break us and inadvertently made us stronger, and grateful for the future that stretched out before us like an endless field of possibilities. The farm was ours. The children were safe. And our story was far from over. In fact, I had a feeling the best chapters were still to come. And if you've been following along with our journey, if our story has touched your life in any way, please hit that like button and subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to hear that their darkest moment might just be the beginning of their greatest comeback. Because sometimes, the people who leave you with $20 are actually giving you something priceless, the chance to discover that you're worth so much more than they ever imagined. Thank you for being part of our story. I can't wait to see what happens next.